She flung the door wide open before I even had a chance to catch my breath. Picture this: stepping onto land your family has owned for a century, only to be greeted by a stranger filming your walls as if they were on trial. She rattled off bogus infractions like she was reciting a script, criticizing the paint, the signage, even my grandfather's war medals. My voice cracked when I demanded she leave, but she just laughed in my face, as if rules simply didn't apply to her. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if this happened to you? Pulling into the gravel driveway after the longest drive of my life, the weathered wooden sign reading Carter Ranch since 1925 welcomed me. Dust billowed behind my truck, settling over wildflowers that had grown untamed along the fence for decades. Harold would have loved seeing them bloom without interference. I grabbed my phone to capture this homecoming moment, watching the afternoon. Sunlight filter through the front window and light up his military medals. Halfway through uploading the photo, I realized a critical mistake. The property number was clearly visible in the corner, broadcasting our exact location to anyone scrolling by. Harold had always warned me against oversharing, and here I was, practically posting a map to our doorstep. Before I could delete the photo, heavy footsteps crunched across the gravel behind me, deliberate and purposeful. The front door burst open with such force that the screen door slammed against the wall. A woman in her late 40s stormed inside like she owned the place, clutching a professional camera that was already recording. Her blindingly white blazer screamed manufactured authority, though I couldn't tell what organization would back this behavior. Her auburn hair was pulled so tightly it stretched her face upward. HOA Standards inspection rights for violation documentation, she announced, without any introduction, sweeping her camera across Harold's living room like a prosecutor collecting evidence. I dropped my duffel bags in the doorway, staring at her in total disbelief. Was she seriously filming inside my family's private home without permission? She moved through the space as if rehearsed, pointing her device at Harold's collection of antique farming tools. Her sheer audacity left me speechless for a solid 15 seconds while my mind scrambled to process the scene. "Excuse me, you're committing criminal trespass," I said, following her further into the house as she continued recording. Jurisdiction covers exterior property visible from streets exclusively," she replied, pivoting toward me with a condescending smirk that made my jaw tighten involuntarily. Safety concerns override individual property boundaries," she added matter-of-factly, zooming in on Harold's bronze star display like it was evidence of wrongdoing. Her confident delivery made her fabrication sound like established federal law rather than something she'd just invented. Fence height exceeds 6 feet, $150 penalty, house paint color doesn't match approved palette, $100 assessment. I watched, fascinated and furious, as she manipulated the timestamp on her recording device between shots, flickering the digital display and adjusting the date backward to fabricate evidence. Did she really think I wouldn't notice? My throat tightened as she treated Harold's military legacy like neighborhood blight that demanded immediate correction. "That's law enforcement jurisdiction, not HOA oversight," I said firmly. Stepping to block her camera from capturing more of Harold's private memorabilia, "And what you're doing now is breaking and entering," I added. Her eyebrows shot up as if I'd said something preposterous. She gestured theatrically around the room as though the walls themselves endorsed her imaginary authority. Harold's diary lay open on the coffee table where I had left it, detailing his repeated refusals of government preservation grants. He had preferred to keep the ranch family run, not bureaucratically controlled. This stranger was filming those private thoughts, treating decades of personal history as public evidence. For a made-up legal case, the Bronze Star caught the afternoon light again, a reminder of Harold's genuine sacrifice, now being trampled by entitlement. My hands shook slightly as I pulled out my phone to record her trespassing. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were, both documenting the same criminal act from opposite perspectives. "You need to leave my property immediately," I said, making sure my video captured her response. "This is unlawful entry under state law." She laughed as if I'd just told her the funniest joke of the week. Her casual arrogance suggested she had used this intimidation tactic many times before, likely on other families. She ignored proper HOA procedures required by state regulations, no 30-day written notice, no board vote, no appeal process. None of this was legitimate. I pointed out that her actions constituted systematic harassment under civil code. Outside, the ranch gate still bore the original 1925 construction date, proof that this land existed long before any modern development. Harold had built something permanent here, deserving protection from those who mistake manufactured authority for real legal power. Behind the Bronze Star display, I found his handwritten letter about safeguarding boundaries to protect community values. Fighting back against her intrusion risked exposing our private military history, but tolerating trespassing wasn't an option either. Harold's service represented duty and sacrifice. Her behavior represented entitled intimidation. She slammed a pre-printed document onto Harold's kitchen counter with theatrical flair, a 48-hour HOA compliance notice. She announced it triumphantly, bypassing every proper community procedure mandated by law. The letterhead looked convincing to anyone unfamiliar with actual regulations. Law enforcement will support HOA safety over individual property claims, she added with unsettling confidence. At the time, I didn't realize this was only the beginning. 2 days later, my mailbox was flooded with official-looking correspondences that would impress anyone unaware of real government documentation. The Heritage Preservation Agency Community Update featured sophisticated letterhead designed to deceive. Over morning coffee, I scrutinized the documents and immediately noticed the email domain ended in .com rather than .gov. Real federal agencies don't use commercial addresses. That trespassing incident had been merely the opening move in a far larger campaign. The falsified letters asserted that an environmental impact assessment was mandatory for all historic homes and demanded immediate access for government inspection. At this point, she was posing as federal authority, a shift that moved her actions from mere civil harassment into serious criminal fraud. The escalation suggested someone adept at manipulating legal systems. My phone vibrated with a private message from a man named Walter Briggs at precisely the right moment. "She's claiming authority she doesn't actually have," his text read, clearly concerned. Attached was the authentic HOA charter. The document outlined actual HOA jurisdiction, limited to exterior aesthetics visible from public spaces, nothing about home invasions or safety inspections. Walter was the neighborhood historian, a sharp 70-year-old who had meticulously preserved community records for over 40 years. He had been observing this pattern with growing unease and finally spoke up when it clearly crossed into criminal territory. HHOA boards only have authority over paint colors, fence heights, and street-visible landscaping, he explained during our long phone conversation. When I called him that afternoon, his voice carried the weight of years of observation. "Lucas, I need to tell you something about your grandfather that you might not know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He paused, and I heard the shuffle of papers behind him. In 1987, Harold testified in court to protect the Morrison. Walter was silent for a moment, then chuckled with satisfaction. "Well, I'll be damned. Harold would have loved the irony. Too bad for some people they picked a fight with someone who actually understands how government works." His tone carried the satisfaction of someone who had seen justice delayed but not denied. The difference between genuine and forged documents became strikingly clear once I knew what to look for. Real government letters used official domains, seals, and proper procedures. The fake letters lacked valid certification and claimed authority far beyond the HOA's legal reach. Her forgeries were sophisticated but flawed. I spread both sets of documents across Harold's dining table like evidence. In a criminal case, the fabricated ones demanded immediate compliance with entirely invented regulations backed by non-existent agencies. The authentic county papers documented decades of proper legal procedure and Harold's consistent cooperation with legitimate authorities. My hands shook slightly as I realized how extensively she had distorted Harold's reputation. Her fake environmental assessment argued that the ranch posed aesthetic and safety risks, requiring urgent government action. The real county environmental report from 3 years earlier had praised Harold's sustainable farming and wildlife preservation. She had twisted genuine conservation records into fabricated condemnation through careful forgery. Harold's bronze. Star Citation highlighted his protection of community values through personal sacrifice during wartime. The ranch had existed for over 40 years before the neighborhood was developed. According to Walter's verified federal land grant records, the property had nearly a century of federal recognition for family stewardship. Fighting back against this fraud meant exposing our family's private military history through public legal proceedings. Harold had valued privacy, but also respected property boundaries and civic order. Using my mayoral position might seem a conflict of interest without formal recusal, but staying silent, wouldn't ongoing criminal fraud. Walter's archive demonstrated Harold's long history of helping neighbors distinguish legitimate property rights from fraudulent claims. Multiple families had benefited from his knowledge of proper governmental procedures versus manufactured intimidation. The Bronze Star symbolized service to constitutional principles both abroad and at home. That same afternoon, an emergency community meeting. Notice appeared, falsely claiming government backing to expand the HOA's authority beyond legal limits. Attendance was surging, driven by misrepresented endorsement from non-existent agencies. People trusted official letterhead without examining it closely enough to spot the forgeries. I revisited the timestamp manipulation on her recording device with this new understanding. Digital evidence clearly revealed deliberate fraud, not a simple misunderstanding of legal boundaries. Her overconfidence during the trespass now made sense. She had perfected this systematic deception through repeated practice on other unsuspecting families. The extent of the documentation pointed to months of planning rather than a spur-of-the-moment annoyance. She had constructed an entire imaginary bureaucracy complete with counterfeit agencies, forged seals, and invented legal authority. This was no longer a simple neighborhood quarrel. It had become a coordinated criminal scheme aimed at pressuring property owners into obeying non-existent regulations. Now I wondered whether revealing my role as mayor so soon would shield our community from further criminal targeting or simply make me a bigger target by threatening the broader conspiracy behind this organized fraud. 3 days after the emergency, community meeting notices were dropped into mailboxes. Officer Hale's patrol car arrived in my driveway. His presence quickly drew the attention of curious neighbors who started assembling at respectful distances, many holding up phones to capture what they anticipated would be a dramatic confrontation. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the ranch, accentuating the contrast between Harold's well-kept property and the manufactured turmoil around it. The officer stepped out with the calm assurance of someone well-versed in handling civil disputes. Perhaps in his mid-40s, with graying temples and a composed demeanor, he carried the look of someone who had seen every kind of neighborhood conflict imaginable. "I'm here regarding the trespassing complaint filed yesterday," he said. Professionally activating his body camera to properly document the encounter, the tension rose as the crowd sensed something significant was about to unfold. A voice from the back called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is going on my live stream." Another neighbor shushed them, but several fingers continued moving across screens, likely posting updates in real time. Cynthia arrived. Moments later, in a pristine white sedan that matched her blazer perfectly. She stepped out holding an expanded folder of fabricated documents, clearly expecting her false claims to be taken seriously. "Officer, this property violates multiple HOA safety standards and requires immediate government intervention," she announced with practiced authority, ignoring the fact that her prior trespassing had been thoroughly documented. Officer Hale addressed the situation clearly for the benefit of the cameras and the growing crowd. "Entering private property without permission is criminal trespassing under state law. Community disputes about property standards are civil matters handled through HOA procedures. Trespassing crosses into criminal territory and requires law enforcement involvement." His explanation was detailed enough to educate the bystanders about real legal limits. He continued, "HOAs only cover exterior property standards visible from public spaces. They cannot enter private homes without consent, nor can they claim inspection authority reserved for licensed professionals." Several people were clearly taking notes, realizing they had misunderstood the scope of HOA authority. One neighbor asked from the crowd, "I thought HOA boards could inspect anything if they claimed safety concerns." Officer Hale corrected the misconception directly. "Only licensed safety inspectors can do that, and only with proper warrants or explicit permission. The HOA's reach is strictly limited to exterior aesthetics visible from public areas. His clarification sparked murmurs of understanding from those who had previously operated under false assumptions. Cynthia attempted to interrupt, waving her forged papers. "Officer, these government documents clearly state HA emergency powers." Hale cut her off firmly with a gesture that drew a few chuckles from the crowd. "Ma'am, I'll review those documents after we're done here," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. The crowd's energy shifted as it became clear Cynthia was losing control of the story she had been spinning. In a quiet moment away from the cameras, Officer Hale shared something that completely changed my perspective. "Harold once helped my family through a particularly harsh winter when my father lost his job and we couldn't pay heating bills," he confided. "Your grandfather never asked for thanks or repayment. He just brought firewood and groceries every week until my dad found work again." This personal connection informed Officer Hale's approach, allowing him to mediate the situation with clarity and genuine fairness. "Harold always respected civic order and expected the same from others," he added, watching Cynthia shuffle through her fake documents. "He understood the difference between legitimate authority and manufactured intimidation. The presence of multiple cameras made every interaction feel formal while also providing a clear educational perspective on actual property rights. I answered Officer Hale's questions with careful attention to proper procedure. I professionally requested that the criminal trespassing be documented thoroughly and emphasized that HOA oversight does not extend to entering private homes under any circumstances. I was tempted to disclose my official position to lend authority, but decided that timing mattered more than instant gratification. Several neighbors began directing questions toward Cynthia. "Where's the written HOA notice? When did the board?" Professional journalism framed the story as informative content about HOA limits rather than a personal neighbor dispute. The reporter interviewed Walter Briggs about genuine community documentation versus fabricated claims, giving viewers concrete examples of how to distinguish legitimate from fraudulent authority. The coverage helped raise awareness about property rights in a way that could benefit other families. Community members started asking detailed questions about proper HOA procedures. "Why hasn't the required civic notice been followed?" one woman asked. Officer Hale confirmed that proper procedure had been entirely ignored, rendering any claimed violations legally invalid. He emphasized that discussions should focus on adherence to law rather than personal disagreements. A few neighbors began expressing their disapproval more vocally. "This is harassment!" someone shouted. "Where's her authority?" another demanded. The crowd's energy decisively shifted against Cynthia as people realized how thoroughly they had been misled about their rights. Personal stakes grew, as I became increasingly protective of Harold's military legacy while being observed by strangers with cameras. Neighbors began questioning the ranch's compliance despite substantial documentation proving otherwise. I felt pressure to disclose my official position for credibility, but doing so too early might seem like abuse of authority rather than a demonstration of legitimate legal knowledge. Officer Hale documented potential criminal trespassing charges while explaining proper procedure to everyone present. He reminded the group that criminal charges require evidence, witness testimony, and prosecutorial review. This was not instant resolution, but proper legal process. The upcoming community meeting would address jurisdictional boundaries with accurate legal guidance. The television coverage also prompted questions about government transparency and ethical responsibilities, as residents sought to protect themselves from similar fraudulent authority claims. Officer Hale provided practical guidance on verifying legitimate versus fabricated government documentation, including checking official domains and verification protocols. I considered revealing my mayoral position to the crowd immediately for maximum effect, but a sense told me that the right timing could completely change how events unfolded if I waited just a little longer. The elementary school cafeteria buzzed with tension as nearly 60 residents squeezed into hastily arranged folding chairs after the television coverage. Social media had spread the word quickly, bringing concerned homeowners from across the district, who were now questioning their own exposure to fraudulent authority claims. I arrived early carrying Harold's heritage documents and watched neighbors enter with phones already recording. Papers rustled constantly as residents shared printed screenshots of Cynthia's fake documents, Conversations were alive with questions. Did you get these letters too? Is this even legal? Who gave her permission to enter homes? The room crackled with anticipation and barely contained anger. Cynthia entered theatrically, rolling a small suitcase and carrying a laptop bag, signaling she had prepared extensively for this confrontation. She brought several supporters from outside the local community, whispering among themselves and avoiding eye contact with residents. Their presence suggested coordination beyond a simple neighborhood dispute, hinting at a broader scheme. Walter helped me set up the projection equipment, his 40 years of community documentation lending authority to our presentation. People need to understand the difference between legitimate government authority and criminal fraud, he whispered, as more residents arrived. Phones were raised as the projector displayed Harold's authentic military documents. Since I had already revealed my position to Walter earlier, this meeting focused on the public confrontation that followed. As I stood to address the community, every phone in the room was aimed at me. As many of you now know, I'm Lucas Carter, your newly elected mayor, I began, watching the weight of the revelation settle on people's faces. I've been handling this as a citizen to maintain ethical standards, but this systematic fraud demands an official response. The room buzzed with excitement, phones swiveling to capture reactions. Cynthia was ready. She stood abruptly, pointing at me and addressing the cameras directly. "This proves my point exactly," she announced, feigning outrage. "The mayor is abusing his position to protect his property while ignoring legitimate community safety concerns. This is governmental corruption at its worst." Papers rustled as residents pulled out their documents, some nodding in concern while others looked skeptical. Questions rang out from multiple corners. Is that true? Can mayors do that? What about conflicts of interest? The energy shifted as the crowd debated whether they were witnessing justice or abuse of power. I maintained calm, addressing her accusations directly. Actually, Cynthia, let me clarify what mayoral authority actually covers versus what you've been claiming. I clicked to the next slide, showing authentic governmental jurisdiction. Mayors cannot override property rights, claim emergency powers without real emergencies, or enter private homes without warrants. Understanding began to dawn across the crowd. Several neighbors shouted questions at Cynthia. "Where's your warrant? Who authorized these inspections? When did the city approve this?" She fumbled with her folder, scattering papers as she attempted to produce supporting documents. She insisted that emergency community safety overrides individual property rights, but her voice lacked the conviction it once had. Historical properties require special oversight for environmental protection. Her repeated fabricated authority claims now sounded hollow against actual government explanation. Walter stood to address the room, his 70 years of community credibility commanding immediate attention. "I've kept a detailed record of every legitimate government action in this neighborhood for 40 years, he stated plainly. Nothing Cynthia has brought forward follows proper procedures or comes from actual authority." The crowd responded, with murmurs of support for Walter, while phones recorded Cynthia's increasingly frantic attempts to regain control. Someone yelled, "Harold always said Walter knew everything." Another voice added, "If Walter says it's fake, it's fake." Tension mounted visually as the community rallied against deception. Cynthia made one last attempt to push back, addressing the cameras with exaggerated energy. This collaboration between the mayor and long-term residents made it clear this was about protecting an old boy network rather than upholding the law. Her words carried the desperation of someone whose carefully built lies were collapsing publicly, but the audience was no longer convinced. Neighbors began standing to share their experiences. "She sent me fake EPA letters too," one woman declared. "Same fake government seals," another resident called out. Papers waved in the air as tangible proof against her accumulated in real time. I displayed Harold's genuine county correspondence on the projector, showing decades of proper environmental cooperation. The contrast with Cynthia's forged documents was stark, obvious to everyone watching. Phones captured every slide as the systematic fraud became undeniable. The emotional weight of sharing Harold's private diary in public balanced against protecting the community as neighbors grasped how extensively they'd been misled. Several. Residents wiped away tears seeing Harold's handwritten notes about safeguarding constitutional rights through proper civic service projected for all to read. As the presentation wrapped up, Cynthia packed her materials with visible frustration, while trying to maintain a confident facade for the cameras. Then, she smirked slightly, looking straight into the nearest phone. "This community will understand the truth about governmental overreach soon enough," she said, disturbingly confident. "Some powers are higher than local politics." That calculated. Smirk revealed she still believed she held a major trump card, leaving the crowd unsure what she might attempt next. The morning after my mayoral revelation, Cynthia escalated her criminal conspiracy to a shocking level. She produced what appeared to be an official county preservation contract with Harold's forged signature, claiming he had signed an agreement granting the HOA governmental authority over ranch operations. The document was convincingly sophisticated, with fake county seals and fabricated municipal signatures, enough to fool anyone without forensic. Hidden file information reveals the document was created 3 days ago, not decades prior, she announced clearly. Shocked murmurs spread through the crowd as phones swiveled to capture reactions. Digital signature verification shows missing. Proper municipal authentication codes required for legitimate government contracts. Did she really think we wouldn't check? A collective gasp rippled through the audience as the implications became clear. Someone yelled, "She forged Harold's signature." Another shouted, "That's criminal fraud." Phones documented every expression of outrage as neighbors realized the full extent of deception by this fake HOA authority scheme. Cynthia sat in the front row, sweat beading on her forehead, as forensic evidence systematically dismantled her elaborate scheme. She rifled desperately through her folder, looking for anything to salvage credibility, but every piece only worsened her position. The community watched her HOA power fantasy collapse in real time. Verification stamps lack proper municipal authentication embedded in all legitimate county documents, the examiner continued methodically. Authentic contracts have specific civic formatting requirements and procedural standards that this forgery ignored entirely. The explanation was devastatingly precise and clear. A local reporter leaned toward her cameraman, whispering loudly enough for nearby phones to pick up. "This is going viral within the hour." The visual record of systematic criminal fraud unfolding live would soon reach audiences far beyond our small community. This HOA scandal was about to make regional news. Throughout the revelation, I remained professional, focusing on criminal law violations rather than personal vindication. Municipal evidence speaks for itself through proper forensic review. During the public presentation, I stated, "Criminal charges require thorough investigation and concrete evidence, not emotional reactions." The satisfaction was undeniable, but the community's reaction to discovering systematic document forgery was a mix of shock and growing anger. People realized they had been targeted by an organized criminal conspiracy, not simply overzealous HOA enforcement. Local contractor Mike Sullivan quietly left the meeting after the fraud revelations, seemingly recognizing his own vulnerability. I couldn't blame him. Walter's historical documentation became critical evidence supporting the forensic findings. His genuine papers demonstrated Harold's consistent refusal of governmental overreach while maintaining proper legal compliance. Harold's correspondence showed transparent communication with legitimate authorities. The contrast with fabricated documents exposed a systematic criminal scheme designed to mislead property owners. Walter proved to be invaluable. Community members began to understand that the criminal investigation extended well beyond neighborhood disputes and into serious federal territory. Municipal guidance was offered to residents who might have fallen victim to similar fraudulent schemes. I clarified that criminal prosecution functions independently from civil remedies, though both could apply depending on the evidence, aiming to keep things straightforward. This discovery led me to scrutinize other questionable documents Cynthia had submitted during her campaign. Her emergency community assessment letters displayed comparable forensic inconsistencies, pointing to a coordinated document forgery operation rather than a one-off incident. The situation was growing far beyond what I had originally imagined. "Are you serious? This much fraud?" She had been fabricating HOA authority for months. As the forensic presentation wrapped up, a neighbor from the middle section of the room stood and yelled, "Arrest her!" Several others quickly joined in. "Criminal fraud! Lock her up! Justice for Harold!" The crowd's energy surged as months of fake HOA intimidation finally faced accountability. Municipal procedures required adherence to proper civic timelines rather than immediate gratification. Criminal charges had to be processed through the correct channels, with investigations conducted by qualified professionals. Court proceedings would follow established legal protocols. I reminded myself, along with the community, of this fact, though the waiting was agonizing. Harold's legacy was finally being safeguarded through legitimate civic processes rather than family connections or emotional pleas. Grandfather's military service earned him constitutional protection through proper legal channels. Holding. A political position offers the knowledge to navigate the system correctly, but cannot replace actual evidence, I reflected while reviewing the forensic reports. He would have taken pride in handling this properly. Cynthia faced professional repercussions for practicing municipal law without a license, producing fraudulent government documents, and orchestrating a systematic criminal conspiracy. State level. Charges were possible for governmental document forgery, while county-level charges could cover fraud and misrepresentation. I wasn't sure whether to pity her or admire the audacity it took to fabricate HOA powers. Walter uncovered further evidence, showing Harold had helped numerous families combat similar HOA fraud schemes over the years. Your grandfather knew that defending property rights meant standing up to any authority that exceeded its bounds, whether legitimate or fabricated, Walter explained while reviewing court records. The pattern of HOA abuse stretched back generations. Suddenly, Cynthia rose, her chair scraping across the gym floor as every camera pivoted toward her. "This community doesn't grasp the higher powers at play here," she declared with unsettling confidence, gathering her fake documents, while locking eyes with the nearest cameras. "Municipal authority is only the beginning of what's coming." She strode toward the exit, but paused to deliver a final statement. Some forces operate beyond local politics and small-town justice. Her cryptic reference to higher powers sent chills through the room, hinting that this conspiracy extended far beyond typical HOA overreach. Would criminal charges alone suffice as a consequence? Or was there a larger force behind this organized scheme? What should be the next step in the investigation? I suspected that the criminal inquiry would reveal something capable of altering the future of our entire community. The State Bureau of Investigation arrived Tuesday morning in unmarked vehicles, turning our quiet neighborhood into the focus of a major criminal probe. The lead detective introduced herself as an expert in governmental document fraud, noting that our local case had triggered alerts in the state's database. The scope was escalating beyond anything I had expected when this began as a simple trespassing issue. What had we stumbled into? The initial investigation revealed widespread falsified documentation across multiple properties in the region. "Your municipal cooperation has been invaluable," the detective said during our first official interview, "but we're uncovering a criminal." During an evening briefing, the lead detective outlined the scope of the financial investigation to the community. The audit revealed payments for document forgery, professional consultation on intimidation strategies, and coordination fees with representatives of development corporations. This level of organization pointed to an orchestrated criminal enterprise rather than isolated misconduct. I couldn't decide whether to be impressed or horrified by the sophistication. Community members finally realized they hadn't just been over-policed. They had been deliberately targeted through a criminal fraud scheme. Several families produced evidence showing similar fraudulent governmental claims on their properties over the past 2 years. The pattern was consistent and clearly coordinated. Across neighborhoods, I was stunned at how many people had suffered quietly. The municipal protection framework expanded to include consultation with the state for criminal fraud victimization. Property rights were reinforced through the findings of the criminal investigation. State oversight ensured systematic criminal targeting was prevented, while legitimate enforcement of community standards remained intact. The educational impact was significant. People throughout the region were gaining understanding. At least some good was emerging from this nightmare. The financial crimes investigation spanned multiple agencies due to interstate banking violations and federal document fraud. Money laundering charges were possible given the deliberate movement of funds through numerous accounts designed to hide the financing of criminal conspiracies. The complexity indicated a professional criminal operation, not amateur intimidation. Honestly, who designs these schemes? State protection measures were put in place to safeguard heritage properties from systematic criminal targeting. Criminal prosecution set precedents for defending constitutional property rights against fraudulent governmental claims. Community safety relied on distinguishing between legitimate authority and organized criminal conspiracy. The detective noted Harold would have loved to see justice functioning properly. My personal stakes had grown beyond protecting family property. They now included constitutional principles affecting entire communities. As mayor, my professional responsibility was ensuring systemic protection rather than pursuing personal vindication. Harold's values, serving within proper civic limits, guided how I approached cooperation with criminal investigations. I reminded myself of that during the hardest moments. Looking back, he probably would have managed it even better than I did. Heritage protection efforts were aided by Walter, uncovering additional Harold documentation showing decades of community legal support against similar fraud schemes. The ranch's history revealed that Harold's grandfather had helped numerous families navigate legitimate property rights versus criminal intimidation tactics. His military service symbolized constitutional defense both abroad and at home. Harold had been engaged in these battles long before I existed. The community began seeing the ranch as a symbol of legitimate stewardship rather than exploitation of constitutional rights. Harold's military sacrifice had upheld those principles. This criminal conspiracy had been systematically violating them. Protecting the ranch represented broader constitutional protection for all property owners facing similar targeting. I couldn't help but feel Harold would have been proud of the progress. New evidence suggested coordination between the criminal conspiracy and a development corporation aiming to acquire heritage properties through intimidation instead of legitimate transactions. The financial investigation was revealing an organized criminal enterprise operating across multiple counties with advanced coordination. Seriously, how deep does this rabbit hole go? State investigators were on the verge of uncovering a conspiracy that had targeted heritage properties throughout the region. Friday afternoon brought the breakthrough we had been waiting for since the investigators arrived. The lead detective called an emergency press conference in the elementary school gym, packed with local media, concerned residents, and federal agents. A clear sign this case had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. The energy in the room was electric. You could practically cut the tension with a knife. The State Bureau of Investigation has uncovered a systematic criminal conspiracy involving fraudulent governmental claims designed to force heritage property sales through manufactured legal pressure, the detective announced. The crowd fell silent. This organized enterprise spanned multiple counties and involved coordination between corrupt HOA leadership and development representatives seeking profit via constitutional violations. I wasn't sure whether to feel vindicated or terrified. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Over 2 years, Cynthia orchestrated fraudulent civic documents targeting 43 heritage properties using fake governmental authority to create artificial pressure and force below-market sales. The sophistication indicated a professional criminal organization rather than opportunistic neighborhood harassment. Honestly, who devises something this elaborate? State charges included conspiracy, fraud, document forgery, and racketeering under organized crime laws. The enterprise generated over $200,000 in fraudulent property acquisitions while embezzling community funds to finance document forgery, the detective explained. Total state fraud charges approached $4 million in systematic criminal financial activity. Are you kidding me with these numbers? Federal agents revealed coordination with development representatives who funded the conspiracy in exchange for below-market heritage property acquisitions. Interstate commerce violations invoked federal jurisdiction because the criminal conspiracy crossed state lines. Looking back, I should have realized it was about money from the start. Emails preserved during our initial investigation were crucial in exposing the broader conspiracy. 18 months of communications revealed a methodical targeting strategy focused on heritage properties with development potential. Personal bank records uncovered criminal payments disguised as civic consulting fees, totaling $32,000. I couldn't believe how big this had become just by refusing to let her push us around. State wiretaps captured coordination calls between Cynthia and development representatives discussing specific properties and intimidation timelines. The audio proved deliberate criminal intent. not a misunderstanding of legal limits. This professional criminal organization operated with meticulous planning across multiple jurisdictions. Seriously, they recorded everything like they were amateurs. I coordinated municipal cooperation with the state investigation while recusing myself from personal property matters. The mayor's office offered civic support while preserving ethical standards. Personal vindication was secondary to ensuring comprehensive criminal prosecution for community protection. Though I'll admit the vindication felt pretty incredible by this point, the community impact extended well beyond our neighborhood, touching constitutional principles affecting property owners region-wide. The criminal conspiracy aimed to eliminate heritage properties through fraudulent claims, manipulating property values via fake government oversight, and systematic constitutional violations. Harold would have been proud of how this all turned out. State law enforcement coordination involved multiple agencies following established interagency procedures. State grand jury initiated criminal indictment procedures following proper prosecutorial protocols. Asset forfeiture actions aimed to seize illicit gains from the criminal conspiracy, while victim restitution programs addressed the needs of affected community members. I wasn't sure whether I was more impressed by the meticulous detail or daunted by the sheer complexity. The development corporation's deliberate targeting revealed a calculated criminal plan rather than random opportunistic fraud. Properties were chosen based on historical significance, development potential, and perceived owner susceptibility to intimidation using fabricated governmental authority. The criminal conspiracy represented a systematic violation of constitutional protections designed to profit from manufactured legal confusion. Seriously, who preys on people's family heritage for personal gain? Cynthia faced state charges including conspiracy, fraud, forgery of governmental documents, and racketeering, alongside federal charges for running an interstate criminal enterprise and committing wire fraud. Personal asset forfeiture aimed to seize criminal proceeds, while criminal restitution addressed harm to community victims. Given the methodical nature of the conspiracy, a state prison sentence was likely. Looking back, I almost felt pity for her, almost. The prosecution's protection of heritage established a state precedent defending constitutional property rights against fraudulent government claims. Criminal law enforcement underscored the serious consequences of systematic constitutional violations disguised as legitimate civic authority. Community protection depends on recognizing the difference between authentic government procedures and organized criminal schemes. This was going to benefit families for years to come. State-level consequences included full asset forfeiture of conspiracy proceeds, restitution for all impacted community members, and ongoing state monitoring to prevent future targeting of heritage properties. Criminal prosecution set a civic precedent protecting constitutional rights while demonstrating effective government action. I couldn't help thinking Harold would have been thrilled to see justice unfold this way. Too bad for the conspirators, they tangled with someone who actually understands government systems. Addressing the community, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. State investigators credited municipal expertise for breaking the case and defending constitutional rights through proper civic channels instead of vigilante measures. Honestly, I never imagined being mayor would prove so useful. Community protection extended beyond our immediate situation, advancing regional heritage preservation through established criminal law enforcement. State prosecution created an educational precedent for other communities confronting similar schemes, showing how constitutional rights are safeguarded through proper government procedures and citizen involvement. This nightmare was, in fact, going to help others, and this prosecution was only the beginning of the justice our community earned through proper civic action and constitutional principles. 6 months later, I stood beside the original weathered ranch sign as state officials gathered for the official heritage protection ceremony. Morning sunlight shone on Harold's Bronze Star display through the front window, casting golden reflections across the assembled dignitaries celebrating constitutional protection achieved through proper government channels. The State Heritage Commissioner prepared to unveil the permanent designation safeguarding the ranch for future generations. Who would have thought a criminal trespassing incident would lead here? The state grand jury had returned sweeping criminal indictments covering conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering against Cynthia and her development corporation partners. The criminal trial resulted in convictions on all state charges, with federal convictions adding penalties for interstate commerce violations and wire fraud. The justice system demonstrated constitutional protection through established legal procedures, as the commissioner highlighted in her remarks. Reflecting on it, I marveled at how perfectly everything aligned. Complete criminal restitution exceeded $300,000, covering community fund recovery, victim compensation, and state interest penalties. The state criminal justice system ensures comprehensive accountability and sets an educational precedent for other communities confronting similar constitutional violations. The commissioner explained to media representatives that state asset forfeiture recovered all criminal proceeds, plus additional penalties, providing community compensation through victim assistance and heritage preservation programs. Criminal accountability serves both punishment and restoration while fortifying democratic institutions against systematic constitutional abuse, noted the State Attorney General in his keynote address. Seriously, who knew justice could be this thorough? Carter Ranch achieved permanent state heritage protection through the proper designation process, balancing historical preservation with family privacy and working ranch operations. State protection sets constitutional precedent while respecting private property rights and family legacy, the commissioner stated while unveiling the bronze heritage marker. I couldn't help imagining how much Harold would have loved this official recognition. Official state heritage protection included educational access provisions allowing schools and heritage organizations to learn about constitutional property rights and proper governmental procedure. This living demonstration of heritage preservation through legitimate civic channels serves an educational purpose while preserving the authentic character of the family heritage. Looking back, this probably exceeded anything Harold could have imagined. Community healing took place through state victim assistance programs, helping residents